It's very important.
From Larrier?
I would like to start by looking at ourselves in the context of what is written in the Bible. Yes, so let me just quote from the book of Isaiah, just 3 verses. Isaiah 20, verses 3 to 5. And it said, and the Lord said, as my son Isaiah had walked naked and barefoot 3 years for a sign and wonder upon Egypt and upon Ethiopia, so shall the king of Assyria lead away the Egyptian prisoners and the Ethiopian captives, young and old, naked and barefoot, even with their bottom exposed to the shame of Egypt. And they shall be afraid and ashamed of Ethiopia, their expectation, and of Egypt, their glory. That was Isaiah, some 500 years before the birth of Jesus Christ, 1500 years after the birth of Jesus Christ. We will led away, young and old, naked and barefoot, even with our bottom exposed, and we have become ashamed of Ethiopia and of Egypt, in other words, of Africa, of who we are. So that is where the problem lies. We are ashamed of who we are as a people. Our social and formal education has failed us in helping us to understand who we are. So that's where the problem is.
However, I know your church has been in the forefront of promoting African heritage, celebrating African culture. When we talk about African Awareness Month, and then people say, oh, Black History Month, and someone told me today, no, I think that we should focus on awareness because Barbadian Black people are not aware of their African heritage and history. In fact, some of them say they're not Africans at all.
We have a thing here called the African snail. It is born right here in Barbados, and yet we still call it an African snail. We take the same trip, but why, when we are born here, are we Barbadian? The scripture says, go down to the ants, thou sluggard, consider her ways and be wise. So we as a people now have to restore ourselves and learn from nature's living book. And if we can learn that a snail, even though it is one here, is still called an African snail, we as a people who have been taken away, even we are born here in Barbados, we are still African.
What say you, Mr. Mcintosh?
Well, I think your question has to do with why awareness. I don't know if there's another group of people in the world whose history and culture has been distorted and demonized the way ours was. What we are attempting to do now is to get it right. And thank God, since the 1950s, we have had a group of writers, artists, all types of, all of the areas of the arts that are seeking to rectify this distortion as to who we are. For example, I went to primary school when I was 5 years old. I left Barbados when I was almost 20. And I had never heard of Marcus Garvey. Why not? The question is, why not? Why is it that I'm not supposed to be fully aware of my history, of my people, where we have come from? I mean to say that you are Barbadian. Yes, we were born here in Barbados. But if we say that Barbados opened up shop, so to speak, in 1627, in terms of a people, that is just like yesterday. You know, we would then be embryos, if I may say. So as a result of the grossness of that distortion. We are now seeking to get it right. And even though we're speaking about the African Awareness Day or Week, it has to be a daily thing. Because until we get our cultural and our historical consciousness back in place, we will always sit at the bottom of the pecking order of this world.
You know, one of the things that people often say to is, oh, you know, what do you mean? They're talking Africa, Africa, Africa. And what I often say to myself, just last week, the Jewish people were celebrating the deaths of 6 million Jews at Auschwitz. How many million of our people died?
Over 170 million strong. Government has been in consort with Korea and Senegal for 180 years. So that's part of it.
So if 6 million died, then you know it's a constant memory. They tell the stories to their children and their children's children. But we as black people seem not to want to know about our history or want to teach it to our children.
Can I say a little story, please? My wife went to Larrier, a slave station just outside of Africa, Senegal. And she brought back some dirt, Rosemary, some dirt. We put that dirt in our house, and every night my baby would screaming because of the horror of the vibration of that dirt is still alive. Africa and African slavery and African tribulation isn't something that we can put away in a cupboard and lock up and say it has no relevance, because everything that we are is as a result of what we will as a people.
Okay. We're going to take a commercial break here. When we come back, we're going to take an extract from Dr. Rodney Worrell as he was speaking about this lack of awareness among our people. Don't forget to call me, 228-556-2, 228-5563, or email me at talk@cbc.tv. I'll be back in a moment. Welcome back. We're talking about the celebrations of African Awareness Month and our African Awareness Day, however we are doing it here in Barbados. And Reverend Wells was talking about an experience that happened, a personal experience. But I wonder, you know, people talk about Africa, and they talk about it like if it's one place. Not that it's about 52, 53 countries, so many different cultures. But let's hear from the extract from Dr. Worrell, where he's talking about our lack of awareness.
I don't think that we are sufficiently aware of how the enslaved were treated on the ships. Sometimes I find it very difficult that the students that I interact with really understand, and when you introduce them to CLR James describing the horrors that took place, some of them even doubt whether James' descriptions were accurate.
That was, for me, was a very important point that Dr. Worrell made, because if people who have studied history, or even if you take cursory looks at history books, and even see the apparatus they made for some of the enslaved people who would be cutting sugar cane, a metal mask with holes on their face so that they wouldn't be able to suck the cane.
I can give you some great insight into instruments of degradation and torture, because I was fortunate to visit the Korea, where I did some field work at Senegal. It's a human marketplace, and it changed me. I spent 1 month in Africa, but that 1 month I did 360. The thing about the atrocities of the slave trade is that we in Barbados, the persons of African descent, we suffer from a huge inferiority complex. It is prevalent in almost everything we do. Barbados is probably the only nation in the world where you can see probably a young lady or a man who has a child, and they will come out in the road and say something. The child might be there playing or forgetting, and say, Jason, why not come this son? You can't say, oh, black, the son getting you. That's the inferiority complex at work in Black Barbadians.
You want to comment on Dr. World's statement?
Well, the atrocities that went on, oftentimes we don't want to talk about them because, for one thing, they're very painful. For another thing, we are up against an attempt, a global attempt over the last 400 years to play them down. I said a little earlier that, I went to school in Barbados, but I had never heard of Marcus Garvey. I had never heard of any of the leading personalities of the day. I only heard about these outstanding people that I should have known about after I left, because the idea was to keep me growing up stupid on the Union Jack. So when we speak about it now, people tend to be turned off, and they tend to even want to say it's not even really true.
And John, you said that because people will say, oh, they're talking about slavery done ever since. Yeah. We don't want to hear about that.
But you see, the thing about it is, I can tell you right now that one of the most important schools in any university is the history department, because somebody seems to know that when you know where you came from, you will know where you're going, and therefore you are anchored. So they want us to forget, because if we forget, it will happen again. So we have to be aware.
I see, Reverend Larrier wants to come in here.
Okay. Yes, also I want to support the statement that Dr. Worrell made. We cannot get our minds around the horrors that took place during slavery. But let's look at Barbados. And every Barbadian should try to understand the history of Barbados. From the time in 1625, some people say 1625, some people say 1627. Barbados apparently is the only colony of any nation that did not start with indigenous people working the land. 10 Barbadians arrived on the ship with 60 or 70 English sailors. The question is, what treatment those 10 Barbadians experienced?
Hold your point there. We have a caller. Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I think we still have a far and a long way to go as far as African awareness in Barbados. We are not teaching our children to love and respect their black selves. And there's a reason for all of this, because the educated African is a lot of trouble for the elite and the hierarchy. They don't want us to know about ourselves. They're not teaching us. They're teaching our children that we were slaves from the beginning. They're not teaching us about when we were kings and queens and when we ruled the earth. There's a long, long way to go. There's so much history. I don't think February is long enough to teach African history, because African history cannot be done in 1 month.
Thank you. Thank you very much, ma'am, for those comments.
Oh, I agree with her. I think she's certainly bang on. Yeah. And unfortunately, we have spent a relatively large amount of time this afternoon talking about the slave trade and the ugly side of it. Mm-hmm. But one thing that we need to understand is that man, as we know him, African man, we're going back at least 150,000 years ago, and what evolved from that time up until this time. And what I would like to see, as far as this awareness week is concerned, our month, whatever, however we want to couch it, but the idea is that it has to be every day. We need to begin to look at education differently. We need to understand that education serves one of two purposes.
Hello.
The first one, you can be educated, and your education could be your weapon to ascertain your freedom. Or you can be educated to be domesticated.
That's right.
When you're domesticated, it means that your education is used for somebody else's freedom. Education actually is cultural action for freedom.
That's right.
And therefore, we're going to have to focus in on these youngsters, because a lot of us are too far gone. There's much you can do with some of us. But we have to start focusing and let our people understand what education is for. It is a weapon, and it ascertains your freedom. If you don't see it in that light, somebody else will use you to ascertain their freedom. That's what's been happening.
Guru, remember your point. We have another caller. Somebody wants to talk to us. Go ahead.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening. Go ahead.
I agree with the last caller. I think there should be an Afrikan Awareness Month, but it should be a year.
It should be every day.
Yes. You see, there's so much to be learned and so much little time.
Precisely.
Right? The only music I listen to is Bob Marley's music because it teaches me about my own self, my own history.
That's right.
Right? I would also like to take this opportunity to say that all the symbols that America uses are African symbols. Every one of them. There's a DVD with title Christianity, the Stone of Religion from Africa. I would love people to get hold of it and watch it. You see, if I have noticed that you can't talk about black, you're always being accused of being a racist. There's nothing to be ashamed of about knowing about your history, knowing where you come from. It annoys me when I hear Brazilians say that they're not African. But I want to go a step further. I'm not West Indian.
Thank you very much, sir.
I'm pouring in a Sprite bottle. It's 10 hope.
Thank you so much for your call. Thank you.
I have to back both of the callers, the lady and the gentleman who spoke about the short time that we have to celebrate African awareness. But the government of Barbados, for the last 7 or 8 years, has been presenting quite a beautiful and wonderful program to the schools in Barbados through the Commission for Pan-Afrikan Affairs. I've been privy to that, and I've been in the schools, almost all of them, taking not only the artifacts that I brought from Senegal to show them, graphically, because if you speak to a child and, you tell them about slavery and so on, they're not so taken. It doesn't get to them. But when they see the life artifacts, the age and the rust, and I explain to them, it comes over very well. So the Commission has a wonderful program through the government, and that's really working good in the schools. So we're part of that.
Okay, we have to take a break here. We'll continue our discussion. African awareness. Don't forget to call 228-5562, 228-5563, or email talk@cbc.bb.
Lady Dollars Hall, watch your hand.
Welcome back to our discussion about African awareness, celebrating Black History Month. And I have Cammie on the line. Good evening, Cammie.
Good evening.
Yes, go ahead.
First, I want to commend you for the human service you provided as it relates to creating awareness of Africa. What is a bit disheartening, though, is that in 2015, we still don't have a direct flight to Africa. We still don't have direct school exchanges with students. Right? We don't even have a news exchange. On my first sojourn to Ghana, I sought to do a live radio link up, which I did from Choice FM in Ghana. And I am a bit amazed that there are so many free-air channels that relate to NTA from Nigeria, or RTA from the Congo, South Sudan, which are all free-air channels, and we still don't have a news exchange with Africa. I'm saying those sort of things don't cost anything, but it can propel the movement in terms of African awareness. I am saying that too many of us are afraid to identify with Africa. Africa is no experience of what it is known as the way again. You have the Chinese going there, the Americans, the British. Why are we, as blacks, still here from Africa. Senegal is 6 hours away.
Right.
But yet I have to go to England to be told by an Englishman, why are you coming to England to go to Africa?
It's concern you about
I can't mind saying, that we need to move beyond just rhetoric. We need to take it by the horn and understand that everybody is going to Africa, and we need to go there also.
Okay.
So I just want to commit you all, because I know that someday somebody will hear our message and understand what's happening. What is it that I have to send a parcel to Africa? And I'm going to charge $300 or $400.
Thank you, Kemi. You want to respond?
I can answer this question. The whole thing to Africa, because I've been to Senegal, and we had to go to America, then you had to go to Madrid, you had to go to Spain and to get to Africa. So it just didn't begin here. Barbados is one of the jewels within the whole pantheon of the slave trade. It's a very important part of what happened during the whole sojourn of slavery. And the whole message that Barbadians don't reflect and don't consider themselves persons of African descent is a deliberate, it has been set, you've been trained to not think of Africa. It's 6 hours away, but you have to go right around the world because it's a censorship. You must not connect. People tell me, you had a good experience in Africa? The Africans don't like Barbadians, they don't like black people. It is such a myth. One of my greatest friends is Prince Jibril Sambo of Senegal.
During the break, we were talking about things that have happened. And I was saying to Reverend Wells that I had occasion to go to a particular school to talk to them about, African history and heritage. And there was one little boy who was crying all the time. I said, well, why is this child so distraught? I found out that the child everybody else had on African clothes. He did not have an African suit. And when he was asked, he said his mother said to him, she's not buying any African clothes because he need African.
Right.
Then there was another instance where a teacher called the child an African snail.
Oh.
So when there are these negative images of Africa, that's why we have to push the African awareness, the awareness of your history, heritage, and culture amongst the younger people.
Yes.
So we all know. What say you?
No. You see, I not disagree, but I have a different perspective. You see, a child comes into the world from a woman. That's the only way in. If you don't teach that parent who she is going to be negative for the child. Then we have a hard task trying to teach the child, because the child still have to go back to the home to the mother. So the woman need to understand the role she has to play in the world of transformation, of transforming, of cognitive restructuring the African person. The African person in Barbados in 1661 was stated from here on in 1661, and just a few years from 1625, 27, you are not a human being. What the woman is going to give birth to are cubs or pups. That's what women used to give birth to. Today, what we call our children, kids, which have the same connotation as pups and cubs, produce of animals. It was only in 2001 that the United Nations said, from here on in, we recognize the transatlantic trade in Africans, not slaves, transatlantic trade in Africans, chattel enslavement, and colonialism were basically crimes against humanity. That is when our humanity was given back to us. We were struggling before, but we're now officially given back to us. That's just like this year start the decade for people of African descent. We now have to do some work on helping all people to understand, as we said earlier, the beauty of Africa. And what the chap said, everyone is trying to get Africa because it's the place where the gold and the diamonds and all the cultural heritage come from. Africa is the cradle of civilization.
I'm glad you talked about portraying Africa. And as a visual artist, we have some beautiful art pieces here from you, Guru. How do you, through your art, tell the story of our rich heritage and history?
I believe that I work from a very base power, and that base power is the ancestors. I had a mother, she had a mother, and hence our ancestors. People have a way of that. But anyhow, the work is informed by those people who have been left out of our history.
Right. We still want to start with the plantation.
This is Mount Wilton Plantation around the late 1800s. It is the location of a murder that took place there. Some slaves had murdered the master alcohol.
Right.
But the thing about what I want to tell Barbados is that out of the vicious society of the slaveholders, because this was 1821, this murder took place. And after these enslaved persons came to the trial, they were hung, and then their heads were cut off and placed on sticks outside the highway at Mount Wilton. So I don't know if that is justice. I don't know what that really is, but that shows you the character of the psyche of the white people at that time and how African persons were treated.
The other
one is Shirley Chisholm. She, illustrates. She was the first black woman to be elected to the Congress in the United States of America. She's also the first black woman to run for president, and she is also an author, an educator, and she's a civil rights activist. She is very important to Barbados because her grandmother was Barbados. She grew up in Barbados. She came here when she was 3 years old, and she went to school at Vauxhall. So in everything, Shirley, that Mrs. Chisholm does, she refers to Barbados. I mean, it's so important. She's a very important.
All right. Let's go to the phone. Nancy?
Yes, good evening.
Good evening, Nancy.
Good evening, and greetings to my brethren there.
Greetings, Nancy.
I noticed that you have all gentlemen there this evening.
Yes.
But you must have your reasons. I wanted to also speak to the same thing that Brother Larrier just spoke about, that we are now into the decade. And the decade of people of African descent, which is actually, we say international. It is from the UN. Right. So that should give a little bit more credence. And I think that we should also remember that our dear Professor Hilary Beckles also was the keynote speaker for that address at the UN. And all of those things should be highlighted in Barbados in the media. That's the problem that I'm having there now. The things in the media can help. We need to be able to have more things on a level playing field, if it were. Because if we go back and we talk about Africa traveling to Nigeria, traveling to Senegal, especially to Gorée Island, yes, that there are a number of people here in Barbados who have made that trek. And many of them are still keeping quiet. We want to do something to, put some fire on the people to, we say, you in your small corner and I in mine, but we all have to do the work together.
Thank you very much, Nancy. We're going to take a commercial break, but when we come back, I want to go to an extract from Professor Hilary Beckles, something that was done in a lecture March 2013. We'll be back in a moment.
Community Files. The Ministry of Tourism is hosting an
Now, we're talking African awareness this evening, and we know that this, from January 1st, 2015, it started the International Decade of People of African Descent. So what I want to do is to have a lot of discussion, not only about the culture, the history, but actually what is happening in Africa today, because I know all of you gentlemen here have made the journey to the homeland. And I hope that I can get the opportunity sometime this evening before the close of the show to ask you what was your experience, your first feelings when you went to the continent. But let's go with this extract from Hillary Beckles.
1791, a slave ship leaving Nigeria on the way to Jamaica with 240 plus Africans ran into the doldrums on the Atlantic. Normally, it would take about 8 weeks for a slave ship to leave West Africa to get to the Caribbean. But these are sail ships, these are not steamships, so you have to go down south, get the wind, and blow your way into the Caribbean. Poor navigational skills, Captain Collingwood found himself in the middle of the Atlantic running out of wind. Now, he has X amount of people, X amount of water, X amount of food. Normally, a slave ship will carry just enough food and water to get across the Atlantic in 6 to 8 weeks and arrive there with as many cargo as possible. You expected to lose about 10% of them, you throw them in the sea when they die. But you expect to get to your market with at least 80-90% of your cargo. So, Captain Collingwood is stuck in the Atlantic. He has a business decision to make. I cannot get to Jamaica. I don't have the wind. The slaves are going to starve to death on the slave ship. What am I going to do? Well, he threw them into the sea, dumped them in the sea, eaten by the sharks, turned around, carried the ships back to England, goes to England, and claimed the insurance on the loss of his property. Now, claims the insurance on the loss of his property. Now, the anti-slavery lobby in England says, hold on a second. This is a case of murder. This is not a case of insurance. This is a murder case. The insurer refused to pay the claim. And in refusing to pay the claim, it goes to the court. The court now has to listen to the evidence, and the court has to decide, is this a murder case, or is this an insurance case? Judge Mansfield ruled, and if I may paraphrase, he says this is a clear case of insurance. It is not a case of murder because the people on board that ship are not human beings. They are no different from horses or any other good. And if the captain had thrown so many horses into the sea, the effect would have been the same. This is a case of insurance, and Mr. Collingwood and his associates must be paid the insurance on the loss of their property. That case established in British law that black people were not human beings, they were property first and foremost.
All of these things documented. We know that after slavery, the same atrocity, the slave owners and plantation owners received 20 million pounds in compensation, as reparations for freeing their slaves. Internationally, there are other people who received reparations. The Jews received reparations. Even France received reparations for demanding their own freedom. Right? Where is our reparations? So all this is part and parcel. We were speaking of the burden that our children has to carry in trying to identify and demand their humanity as Africans. But Rosemary, after how many years of independence, do you not think that the first pillar of independence is identity? And then what then has our leaders who are charged with charting a course for national, national, and international development? What were they thinking by not giving us and our children the foundation of us being African people? Because it's only when we know ourselves that we can build anything. I am working in the tourist industry, and believe you me, there is nothing more heartening for the tourist to have a conversation with somebody who is in love with themselves as an African. When you try to be something other like the tourist, imagine a black man trying to be like a white person, and you trying to interact with them. They look at you as if you have more than screws missing. Yeah? But when you act with them with self-confidence and mutual respect, they praise you, they praise your country. They want, where are these people from? So we have to understand that identity is the foundation pillar. And anyone who perpetuates that old colonial regime, they are gaining by, as Dennis said, using education for domestication.
I'm glad you talked about that, and I'm going to have you all back here because there are a lot of persons who have been educated in the education system who really don't want to hear anything about Africa. It is just, they're not Africans, they don't want to hear anything about Africa, but I'm not going to talk about them now. They will be the subject of another program. But I know that all of you here have gone to Africa, the continent. And I want you to be very brief because we're running out of time. And Guru, I'm going to start with you. What was your first feeling when that plane landed? And you got out of that aircraft, went into the terminal building. What was the feeling like?
The feeling? Well, I guess the officials at Senegal thought I was a crazy old madman because they put my bags down and I knelt and I kissed the ground.
Okay.
So that's what now.
What about you?
My birthday was in 1987 to Egypt. And I did exactly as Guru did. I get off the plane, put my hand on the knelt, and I kissed the ground. I did the same thing in Ghana, when I first went to Ghana, and went to Larrier Castle. So you see, we have the same experience.
What about you, Well?
It's universal. As a matter of fact, the Africans tend to expect that of you because they just step aside and they allow you to do your worship of thanks.
Well, I first went to Africa in 1972, went to Nigeria to work. And when I arrived there, the truth of the matter is I don't even know how to explain to you what happened to me. But one thing I know for sure that I haven't been the same. Thank God I then had an opportunity to work in Nigeria in Ghana and Liberia with the United Nations. As a matter of fact, my last daughter was born in Liberia. And the truth of the matter is, during the time when I was in Africa, I felt fulfilled. It's a feeling. I wish that we could take every Barbadian to Africa for at least one day, and they'll see.
I would like to just add that we are doing work within the Pan-African Coalition of Organizations. We are having the launch for the decade for people of African descent.
Correct.
We are having the launch on February 22nd at 6 p.m. at the NUPW Auditorium at Darky. And this is open to the general public. You can come because your ideas for the building of our people are very important and they are most welcome. On February the 6th, which is this Friday, we are having our launch of Black History Month in Pelican Village. And we are doing, the Minister, Dr. Williams, is giving the opening address. But later in the evening, as one of the callers said, he only listens to Bob Marley. We are giving tribute to Bob Marley at 6 p.m. at Pelican Village in the evening. Come on down. All are welcome.
I understand we were having an exhibition, you didn't tell me.
Oh yes, I'm having an exhibition on the 29th of February, presented by the Commission for Pan-African Affairs. It's called Barbados, the History, the Passion, the Pain, Artist Group. Dr. Mcintosh is always with me on his children. He came up with the name, which is a very, very important, and featuring King Jajavo Popo, Shirley Chisholm, Robbie J. Arnold Ford, Prince Hall, all Barbadians in world history.
Okay. One of the things I want to ask, I don't know who can answer, the Mayafra ceremony that was held recently. Tell me, what was that about?
Honoring our ancestors.
those who did not make the journey, Hillary said that threw them overboard and the sharks would eat them. One of the things that we didn't realize is that when that slave ship was sailing, the sharks always followed because there were always Africans who were thrown overboard. So it was time that we honored our ancestors, those who lost their life at sea, and the Mahatma ceremony.
And then we have it up there on Bronx Beach. Go ahead.
And if we honor those that didn't make it, obviously we have to honor those that made it because it is the reason why we are here.
You know, I think that one of my experience in traveling to Ghana, Nigeria, Morocco, and having been to the continent, and especially in West Africa, it's only when I went there that I understood why when we got here, we were able to survive because it was so much like home.
Yes, right.
It was so much
with
like
all the ingenuity that we have, you know. But I'd just like to make a continued celebration because we are going to over 20 schools this month.
Good.
And what we are taking this year is not necessarily the horrors of slavery only, but we are showing the development in Africa. Because today's children cannot realize that South Africa or Nigeria or Ghana, the development in Ghana can be equal and parallel to as any North American or European country. And people are amazed, wait, that is Africa.
Yes.
So we have to take the discussion to another level to show people the greatness. We won't always slave. We came from greatness. We went through a journey for more than one reason. Joseph was sold into Egypt for what reason?
I'm sure you heard somebody say, oh, you're always using drums. The drums are in other cultures. Tell me about the African drum. I'm sorry, I can't lift it, but he's going to get it first. I think Onkphra, you bought this drum.
I always walk with my drum.
He always, what is it that you always walk with your drum?
My drum has been a spiritual guide. It has been like a map and a compass. That drum has led me through all different countries, always onto a greater enlightenment and consciousness.
Where was the origin? Which country?
This drum came from Ghana, our first visit. And the wood, the skin, the root, it has a very special vibration. In tribute to the man Bob Marley. Do you hear the roots, the higher man sing? Babylon is gone down. Babylon is gone down. So on the 6th February, Pelican Village, but also at 6 p.m. at the Clement Fame Center on the 7th, because Bob Marley is so large you can't celebrate him one day. Our Nation of Islam brethren will be doing a celebration of Bob Marley at the Clement Fame Center beginning at 6 p.m. on Saturday. So if you cannot make it Friday, please make it Saturday.
Okay. I just want to say before I go, I really want to thank the gentleman who sit at the Love Rock Bar in Everton in St. George. I was involved in a vehicular accident and I was injured, and lots of the guys from the Love Rock Bar came out to help me. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you for watching.
His name is Love Rock.
Take us up. Go ahead.
Coming all the way from Africa, coming to carry us home. I come all the way from Africa, coming to carry us home. Coming to carry us home. Coming to carry us home.